It's a weird, weird time we're living in, Jolene. I think in my entire life, there's never been like a stranger time. I can look back on my life and I can think of really hard times, funny times. In my 20s, I think I was very carefree, for instance, so I never worried about a lot of things that I worry about now. But this is just the most kind of twilight zone-ish kind of period of my life where things that you never thought would happen, like COVID and even some of the race and social justice, some of the racial stuff that's been happening. I kind of expected some of it, but not to the level of intensity of just Asian hate and Black Lives Matter and all of that, where I'm thinking, wow, do we really have to still go out and march in the streets and draw attention to this? And then on top of it, you get a lot of people who just want to live in their colorblind world and their kind of bubble of obliviousness. And then when you try and convince them, you get this pushback of like, no, it's not that bad. It's being over exaggerated. But yet they know nothing about the life that we're living, but yet they seem to be able to comment on what it's really like for us to live our own lives, even though they don't really know us or live our lives. So it's just bizarre right now, I think, in so many ways. What do you think?
Bizarre. I would say, yeah, kind of unreal. I mean, and my life has been a little bit shorter than yours, but
Just
but
a
I've had
wee,
a
just a wee bit.
but I've had a very privileged life, and so I haven't lived through very much. I mean, 9/11, but I haven't. So for me, it's the most horrible time ever. And personally, in my life, I've never had such a terrible year and a half or two, and so it's it is just wondrous. Wondrous in a terrible kind of way, just picking up with the news, just with gun control or lack of, like, guns aren't the problem. Oh, well, what just shot? Like, anyways, it's shocking how much comedy, like the comedians that I watch. I mean, it's just nonstop comedy of, you don't have to make this up, and it's not funny. Death is not funny, but I do find myself looking at murders all day long, particularly yesterday and today. So
Mhm.
it's um it's terrible.
Well, I think that you mentioned comedy, for instance, and it makes me think about, because I'm a big lover of comedy, but it makes me think a couple of things. First of all, comedy, I think throughout history, and especially I'm thinking of the 70s in particular, like with comedians like Richard Pryor or George Carlin or any number of kind of harder edged comedians who did social commentary. It it made the reality of racism and other issues more palatable, in that because it was being delivered in a comedic way, but they were very clever at making you think without you making you laugh and think at the same time, I guess is my point.
Yeah, I just posted Jordan Klepper. Yeah, Jordan Klepper. He's a white guy, and he's on the Trevor Noah's show.
Mm.
He does specials with the Daily Show, and he goes all the Trump rallies, and he did this thing about guns. And so, the thing is, like, how do you solve all the mass shootings? Well, you know, a, a good guy with a gun. And so he was able to, over the mail, he's able to mail to Florida and then get some training, 8-hour training, and then he's good to go. And was kind of making fun of that. And you get to see how ridiculous and how hard it is to operate a gun on pressure. And I so thank the Trevor Noahs and the comedians who are able to do this, because it is ridiculous. But at least I can laugh, because when I look at murders all day, it's not it's not so funny. So at least there's some comedy there.
Well, I was thinking about what you said about the guns. There's an idea that you should just arm teachers.
Yeah.
I mean, teachers have it. Teachers have a tough job anyway, and now they've got to worry about handgun training, and even if you have a handgun versus an AR-15 and somebody in body armor, I mean, I think you're going to need more than a handgun. I mean, the guy in Buffalo, the guard in Buffalo, took a shot at the guy, and it didn't touch him, didn't phase him, bounced right off apparently, and then he wound up getting killed. So some of these kind of quick fixes, I don't think are such a good idea.
Yeah,
But
it's
I have to ask you this: with all the murders, because I'm kind of a news junkie, do you get numb at a certain point, or do you just turn the TV off? Or because it's got to have an effect on people, even if it's subconscious. I think all of these murders and violence.
gosh, I'm not numb to it. It's hard to describe. I I think I think it's fascinating, I guess, how the media portrays the different mass shootings and the different killings. And so I'm not numb to it, but I'm not surprised. I mean, it's not a surprise, like, oh, another 10 people were shot today. Yeah. Um, but I think what's so fascinating is the way, for example, with Buffalo, of Black victims, it's like it is clear Black victims. And it is portrayed from all the news, at least all that I've seen maybe 20 different stories, that it was racially motivated and Black people were the target. That was very clear. And I am so pleased to hear that, because that's not, when there's Asian victims, that is not the case. And the mass shooting in the subway in Sunset, New York, and Brooklyn. So I tracked that story for a while, of the 10 people who were shot. Luckily, nobody died, and there was 29 people who were injured. But there's no mention except for one. I just saw one recently, the latest one. It was an Asian reporter in New York. And at the very tail end of the story, by the way, this is an Asian and Hispanic, excuse me, place. But otherwise, all the coverage, all the coverage is, oh, it was a terrorist. It must have been this whole group. And it's just, can't believe what the motive was. And the first thing I say was, were they Asian? Well, there's your motive. And,
Mhm.
and looking at all, I just saw another video of the footage in the subway, and these are Asian bodies. I don't know if all of them were Asian, but you have this community that is Hispanic, majority Hispanic and Asian. And I saw so many Asians with blood coming out, but they didn't mention the victims. And I don't, after that story, and that story is gone now, but there was never a mention of racial motivation. And there was only one story that mentioned one victim, because they said the mom, and by the way, 5 of the kids were teenagers, and they took these 5 teenagers to this particular hospital, and they talked about one mom was Chinese because she didn't speak English. So, but it's like they're so careful to mention they're not Asian. And so that's weird. And I don't know if you heard about, did they talk about guns and gun safety after this one? Excuse me.
After the Buffalo,
After the
or
subway, after the subway in New York.
not that no, I don't think so.
And
Not, no, not like they have in any way, compared to Buffalo or what happened in Texas. I mean, of course, the conversations all kind of reignite about gun control, and then people start going back and forth, you know, with arguing about it.
because I think, like, with the kids, um, I think it's so strange and delightful. I find delight with how the Texas mass killings are um, talked about, because they're talking. I mean, I was listening to Abbott, unfortunately, and he was talking as if they were white kids. Like, I've seen a lot of interviews with white people who are like, they're one of ours. And it's Latinx. These are Hispanic
Mm.
victims. This is a Hispanic community. And I was so pleased that they are deserving of the news and of respect and attention. So I'm so glad about that, because normally that isn't talked about. And I think there hasn't been much mention of race either, which is interesting. But I feel like there's been more gun control talk now, opposed for the 3 mass
Mm.
shootings. What have you seen?
Yeah, I've just seen this replay so many times. I mean, I remember Columbine and all of the different shootings. I mean, even the shooting with the people in the movie theater, where people are sitting there ready to watch a movie. and the guy, I think it was in Colorado somewhere, came in and killed, I don't know how many people. And it wasn't political, it wasn't racial, but it stirred up, of course, never ending debate about gun control. And I remember when I was in junior high school going to NRA meeting and to just figure out what was going on. And this was in the 70s. So it's just a cycle, and then it'll die down again. And then probably what will come out of it is that there'll be more security and more attention given to protecting children, which is always a good thing. But at the same time, this school, there's video footage of the shooter entering through an unlocked door. So I'm thinking you can keep people in prison. And I mean, I hate to say, I hate to think of poor little kids, fourth graders having to feel like they're in a prison. But I've been to prisons, and you cannot get in. I mean, it's just, they have it sealed up. And this guy just waltzed. In fact, he was shooting at the school. He was outside the school apparently for 15, 20 minutes, and he's shooting his gun off, and then he just walks through the door. What kind of security is that? I mean, people lock the door to their house. You can't lock the door to the school. So I think it will increase the people paying attention to security. It's like after 9/11, airport security got amped up a lot, but still you've got people blowing things up and wanting to kill people. So you're treating the symptom, not the disease, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah, solve the problem.
But I wanted to go back to what you said earlier about the media coverage, because like if Asian people, like with the subway, or Black people in Buffalo, I still feel personally that for whatever reason, and we've talked about this, there's this perception of racism. When you think of racism in Black people, then you think of racism in Asians. I'm not talking about us. There's just a different perception, which I think directly relates to the sometimes unfair reporting or the way things are reported. Because I still think people think of, when they think of racism, they think, oh, Black people, Indigenous people, Latin people, and then maybe fourth on the list is Asian people. But if you're an elderly Asian woman walking down the street and somebody runs you over with a car and screams that you're responsible for COVID, it's just as bad as any other display of racism. But I still think there's this attitude of like, well, Asians don't have it nearly as bad. And if it does happen, well, that's just kind of this random thing. And as we've talked about, I think part of it is maybe a lot of Asian groups or people, whatever, aren't as vocal about it, so that it doesn't, because it's almost, what is this, squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of thing. It's almost like you have to keep making noise to get people to go, oh, I think there's a problem here. And that doesn't always happen with Asian communities.
Well, I would say,
not that I'm faulting them at all. I'm not faulting them at all.
Yeah, well, I say with this, I mean, I don't really feel safe to say. I guess I kind of did, but on white people doing something on this group that you and I are in, it's anti-racist, and so these folks, I feel very safe to say what I posted today, talking about. Excuse me. I am so glad that the Latinx kids that were shot up and the teachers are getting attention, that they are worthy of attention and are getting it. And people are speaking as it's like they're part of the community, because that's not what the Asians get. And I'm so pleased with the Black community too, that the news actually characterizes this as racially motivated, because with the Asian victim, it's not. And for me to say something about that, I hold it in. I'm like, oh gosh, I really want to say something, but I don't know what Black people are going to say, or what white people are going to say, or are you whining? Do you not care that Black and Latinx are being shot? Like, I don't know what other people are going to say. I want to just add in. I'm hoping, like with white people doing something in this group, that people will say, oh, I didn't know that all these Asians were shot and killed so often and on that timeline. I didn't know that. And that is a problem also. And so it's hard for me to speak up, even though I am very extroverted and I'm willing to risk things, but it's that risk of other communities saying, are you complaining?
Hmm.
Well,
Mhm.
what do Asians, what I know Asians and they make a lot of money. So what are you talking about? What do you know, I just, I don't know what the opposition would say, but sometimes I'm like, gosh, I have to say something because I'm probably the only one who will. And, but there's that hesitation because I may be like, You don't care that other people of color were killed. Like, it's like, no, I do care. I want you to also know that
Mhm.
Asians are being killed and not reported on. So,
I really think, and I hear what you're saying, and I think, yes, at times I've even felt on certain, Facebook groups, Zoom calls or whatever, that it's almost like this competition starts to happen of like, we have it worse than you do. And to me, it's irrelevant really, because what I think that is that hate targets many different people. And I think what just has to happen is people need to just form coalitions, multiracial coalitions, anti-hate. It's not about, oh, you've had it worse than me, or, oh, only 20 Asians were killed, whereas 42 Black people were killed. It's not about that. It's about there's a force in this country that is hell-bent on destroying, killing, suppressing, diminishing, and it shows up maybe in different ways depending on who the group is. I mean, there's Jewish people. I did a whole podcast on anti-Semitism because some people totally forget that Jewish people are targeted as well. And in fact, the Buffalo shooter was not only hating on Black people, he's also hating on Jewish people because in his mind, he was thinking the Jews were behind bringing all the illegal immigrants and all this other stuff. So it really doesn't matter. No, you're not whining. It's like, let's all come together and see what we all can do about this because we're all in the same boat ultimately here. So let's not get sidetracked with you. And so I'm encouraging you on white people doing something or whatever group it is, speak your mind.
yeah. And
I mean, you
yeah.
shouldn't be suppressed or put down because of that.
Yeah. And what's sad is like, I don't really share on my wall with my friends, with my 1.4 thousand friends and my 600
Mm,
or whatever, 800 followers, because I get
mhm.
silence there and I don't actually feel that safe. Maybe I will. I don't know. And I was going to say with other Asians, like Asian advocates, um, a lot of them just don't say, like, I don't know who's going to be speaking up, like talking about how they're portrayed, like comparing the three different victims. Because that's too much, and a lot of Asians won't say anything because they don't want to take anything away. The spotlight is on Black folks and that is deserving. If I say something, it may look like, and so a lot of them won't. And I see us as we are a team, but I don't know that people will see that. So
Well, and I was just thinking, like, when something happens with Black people, for instance, I can turn on CNN and I'll see Al Sharpton. I'll see a lot of very prominent Black people that I've seen for years. But yet when something happens in the Asian community or in a city, I will see them report on it. And I will even see quotes or sound bites from Asian people, but it's not the same type of, they don't have the same profile. I mean, I'll see a special on King 5 or something like that, but it's all very, very subdued or more subtle, say, than what happens if I turn on MSNBC and I'll see a whole panel for an hour talking about it. So
mm,
right off the bat, it's like advertising.
yeah,
If you run an ad at the Super Bowl, there's a heck of a lot more people going to see your ad than if it runs at 11 o'clock at night in Kansas City. But that's what happens. So I think, and that feeds into this thing of, well, Asians don't. Well, oh yeah, oh yeah. Did you hear the thing about it? Yeah, yeah. It's very vague, as opposed to, oh, did you see Al Sharpton was on CNN again talking
yeah.
about or there were marches in the streets or whatever, or if somebody gets shot, that one attorney, I can think of his name, he shows up immediately. So the exposure factor is much different, I think.
Yep.
So there you go,
That's,
Jolene. There you go.
so many times I have to just like smile at reality.
But what about, okay, in the across the country, who are the prominent Asians? I don't know if they're celebrities, actors, politicians. I mean, I think there's for instance, there's, I think is it Boston has a
Yeah,
Asian
Michelle
mayor.
Michelle Wu.
Yeah,
Michelle
I'm not
Wu.
sure the name, but I'm just saying I think it would help if those really prominent Asian Americans, Asian immigrants,
Yeah.
whatever, AAPI got a much higher profile. And because it just takes that repetitiveness, I
Yeah.
think, to finally sink in to people's minds. Oh, they're having a real issue. They're being targeted. They have to hear it 25 times.
Yeah, there's a tiny bit of progress here and there, and I think that Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and some TV shows and people who do the commercials are
Hmm.
realizing there's money out there for Asian watchers, Asian American watchers. So it's slowly changing, but definitely not enough to keep down the murders or to have non-Asians realize that Asians are being targeted still. I think it's just it's not enough. So it's very frustrating. And
Well, I mean, I think that there's knowledge and power, or power and knowledge. I just say that because I think one thing, and you're doing this, you're working hard at educating people, and that's the first step. I think even if you go back to the civil rights movement, I think one thing that back in the 60s, I remember there was a point at which, Martin Luther King was very smart, because I think they called it something like action, peaceful resistance or something. He had a
yeah,
philosophy that whereas you feel like going and just attacking the oppressor, go and march, and then they are going to come, the cops are going to come and jail you and unfortunately beat you up and all this other stuff. But then it wound up on national TV, and then it wound up being seen outside of the United States. And I think that's one thing that helped motivate the Kennedys at the time, or John F. Kennedy, to say, hey, the whole world is seeing these Black people marching peacefully, getting beaten up. But it opened up a lot of people's eyes, just like the George Floyd murder shocked a lot of people, because they just had no idea that that could even
yeah,
happen.
right.
So I think that that education part is really important, because then you start drawing people in. I mean, I remember after George Floyd, there were like all these different like examples of protests, and they even had like the Amish were protesting, even because everybody was just so struck by this, I can't believe what I just saw kind of thing. But that's what it took.
Well, as I'm imagining what you're talking about, I'm thinking, well, Asians are on video being attacked and nobody cares. So I mean, so it has to be in different ways and probably in the next century or something, because it's just like,
Well, yeah,
yeah, I mean, so
I
it's
was,
yeah.
well, no, I don't mean, I'm sorry to I'm just of course, these thoughts are kind of flowing through my head. And I
Yeah.
remember, and I've thought about with what you're trying to do. I was in a Clubhouse room the other day, and that's that app, where the social media app, whatever you want to call it. And I forgot what they were talking about. I think they were talking about podcasting or something. And I said, well, one of the things people should be talking about, and if they have any kind of a news oriented podcast, is what happened in Buffalo. And you could like hear a pin drop all of a sudden. And even the moderator joke, oh boy, you really brought down the room, didn't you? And I did. There was like no comment, because I think there's this, and this could be whether it be Black people, Asian people being beaten or whatever. It's like this, oh, I don't know what to do about it, so therefore I'm not going to do anything. And it comes off. It's not that I think people don't care, but it's not resonating with them enough to motivate them. Whereas you're going to be motivated if you live in a community where all of a sudden there's a lot of break-ins, because your house might be next. Or if your kids are being harassed on the way to school, oh boy, then you're out there, you're going to do something. Now, if it's somebody else's community, there's that sympathy factor of like, oh, that's too bad. And then you move on. And that, I think, is what happens. And then there's, on top of that, is people really don't know what to do about it. So they don't do anything.
Of course, I'm telling them. So, I was when you were talking, I was thinking about King 5 TV and how they have that show Facing Race. They had the 13 episodes and it was really good. And I was thinking, okay, will they do an Asian version? Because it was
Mm.
really black and white. They threw in a Latinx there once or so, and it was very good. And so I'm pleased with it. And they are doing a couple of stories here and there now, which are really great. And they did 2 Asian stories, so that's important. And so I'm hoping to get some more Asian representation, because it's Asian news reporters are out there, and um, it really is always black and white, which is important. And Black folks are more plentiful, not in Seattle though,
Mm.
but are
True.
louder and do know how to protest, right? And so but Asians, we do it in a different kind of quiet, behind the scenes kind of way. And so, yeah, I'm hoping to get a little bit more representation. And I haven't contacted King 5, but I'm going to.
Well, I think the only problem, if you want to even call it a problem, with
Challenge.
some of the or challenge with some of those things like King 5 doing something, which I think is great. I hope they keep doing it. Is that who's watching it? A lot of times, the people who are watching it are people that are already on board, or they're allies, or they're people that are kind of maybe new converts, in the sense that they're curious, but they're open-minded enough. Hey, let me check this out.
Yeah.
And then that's an important group of people as well, because those
Yeah.
are people who maybe weren't so engaged. But the people who are the racist, or the kind of colorblind folks that say, well, why do we all have to talk about this stuff all the time? Why are we, sometimes for me, they're more challenging than just somebody who's just flat out racist, because it's almost like the person who, has 6 cocktails and then goes and crashes the car. You say you had 6 cocktails and you were blowing a .30. Really? I didn't think I was. It's that denial thing. And I think those are the people that don't move. They won't turn on King 5 because it's just too much attention being paid to that. I'm colorblind. I have a couple Asian friends, and and I just don't think about it. And if we don't talk about it so much, it won't be a problem. And then, but if you're that elderly Asian woman who just got beaten up, in some city somewhere because she's Asian, or you're a Black person trying to shop, in Buffalo, and get killed, do you tell the shooter, well, if we didn't talk about these issues, I wouldn't get shot? So I get tired of people sitting out in the suburbs somewhere talking about, oh, we're talking about this too much, and they're all kind of homogenous community. I mean, fine, that's where you want to live, but nothing about what other people are experiencing and their own lived experience, no matter who that person is.
Well, this last week, I have been listening to a lot of panels with Asians, just trying to, like, at least I'm not alone, and really hearing other Asians and what they're doing, just to like feel some sort of like some motivation. And then also on diversity panels. And it is so interesting on these diversity panels, they have nothing to do with Asians. So it's, I didn't do
They
this.
don't.
No, I asked, so I noticed
Yeah.
the stats you use are Black and Hispanic. Do you consider Asians as people of color? Because, just curious. And she was like, oh yeah, I'll look into that, and then
I'll look
I
into it.
yeah, like other stats, and like, oh yeah, no, yeah, we consider them people of color. I was like, okay, but you in this 2-hour thing, there's no mention. And then they're talking about gosh, it's just like all the stats and all the references are never Asian. And they're talking about, Pride Month coming up. And I'm like, oh,
Mm.
by the way, we're in May right now. It's Asian American, Native Hawaiian,
Ah.
Pacific Islander month. Oh, thanks. And so like, they did recognize me saying thank you. But like, I think I was on 4 diversity panels, and it's just there's no mention. There's a lot of neurodiversity coming out, and blind, and so I'm pleased to see how diversity how diverse it is and that people will learn about all the different abilities. I don't know if Asians are going to make DEI, are they included ever? It's just, it's like, it's so sad. Um, so yeah, so just want to let
Well,
you know what's going on there.
well, I think, as I said, and this is the theme of this conversation that we're having, is that I think that all of us, all of the different minority groups, to BIPOC, what disabled,
Yeah.
everyone needs to come together and then not sit around competing with each other. But the fact is hate. And if you're a target of it, it's equally heinous. So with that in mind, it's just like cancer. Cancer doesn't discriminate for the most part, um, in terms of who can get it.
Yeah.
So it's I just get tired of all the competition going on. It's like, we're stronger together, coming together and talk about how can we educate people, how can we call things out, because you could turn on a TV and just hear some stupid thing coming out of somebody's mouth about every 10 minutes. And what it does is, some people, and this is where the color blindness is a danger, is a lot of people won't pick up on it because they're just not even wanting to think about race. So people say ignorant comments, and then it spreads like an infection, because then you got people listening to the comment, believing it, even if it's
Yeah.
ignorant. Then you have people teaching their kids, well, those Asian people are this, and the black people and the Latin people are that, and the gay people are this, and it's got to be called out, because otherwise it just spreads. And if it is called out, some people who might not have seen it before can actually then recognize, oh, wow, okay, it's not cool to say that, or it's not. And again, just making people follow rules, again, it's treating the symptom and not the reason for the disease. Because anybody can follow rules. Just because they desegregated the schools didn't mean that racism ended. It just meant that the racists were forced to let their kids go to school with the black kids finally, but it didn't change the way they thought or behaved in a lot of ways.
We can learn so much, Kevin. This is so exciting. I just I wonder what's going to happen next week.
Well, stay tuned.
All right, thanks for chatting with us.